Now welcome the next panelist on stage, Dr. Diana Benjumea, lecturer and co-associate at the College of Interdisciplinary and Experiential Learning, Singapore University of Social Sciences. Dr. Benjumea, please.
Test. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Diana Benjumea, and I'm actually quite excited to be today with all of you to talk about spatial mediators for environmental self-transcendence and sustainable behaviors. And I would like to start this talk by discussing the impacts that urbanization and our lifestyles in cities have impacted actually the amount of time we spend outdoors in nature. We are more screen dependent, and also there are studies that are showing that children and young adults might be spending more time indoors than previous generations. And this can actually cause serious problems, especially for sustainability. And this means that actually it can neglect the certain neural pathways that enact or catalyze empathy and care towards the natural environment. In other words, this could diminish. In other words, this actually might diminish the quality that the quality of time we spend in nature, and ultimately might adversely impact environmental projects, initiatives, and ultimately it might hinder pro-environmental behaviors. So where are we right now? What do we know? What science is telling us? So there are plenty of studies that show a positive association between exposure to nature and the physical, psychological, and emotional well-being. There are also some other studies that have proven that exposure to nature might actually trigger or enact pro-environmentalism, and also certain behaviors that benefit the environment. And actually, some of these impacts might be manifested in biocentric values. And just to give you a little bit of context here, environmental attitudes refer to an individual's beliefs, affects, and also behavioral incentives to engage in activities or issues related to the environment. These studies are also showing us that environmental attitudes generally are mediators in the relationship between nature exposure and pro-environmental behaviors. And what are pro-environmental behaviors? These pretty much are related to the responsible and protective behaviors that are usually manifested in biodiversity conservation, adoption of recycling efforts, so on and so forth. So what is our commitment? What have we been doing so far? We actually are interested in exploring and observing those spatial ecology mediators in order to identify how they can actually impact in the long term pro-environmental behaviors. So we've been assessing ecological integrity, among other aspects related to that, well-being, spatial design, and also we've been analyzing the pro-environmental behaviors that are enacted. So there are two main categories here. The first one is organic, that includes natural ecosystems. And the second one, inorganic, which includes the built environment. And I'm sure by now you're familiar with buildings that include nature elements indoors and outdoors. So here, I will be giving you an overview of some of the categories that we've been analyzing in several parts of the world. But just for the sake of context, I'll be talking about this category number one, which is nature integrated in buildings. Second, which is urban green infrastructure, or UGI. The third one, which are initiatives, green initiatives led by communities. And the fourth one, initiatives led by an individual. Again, I'm just showing you a summary and aggregated of the all aggregated data that we have. And here, I just want to show you the results for categories 1 and 2. And I want to bring your attention to the indicators that we use to measure ecological integrity, habitat for plants, better habitat for plants and animals, and therapeutic values. And we actually found significant differences between these two categories. UGI is performing better than category 1. In terms of space, there were no significant differences here, but I want to bring your attention to these two indicators: well-being and restoration, positive emotion, and the indicators related to environmental awareness and altruistic and biospheric values. And it seems that UGIs have the potential to enact greater well-being and altruistic values, biocentric altruistic values. Now let's take a look at categories 3 and 4. And these two are actually quite interesting. And if we take a look at the same indicators I showed you previously, there are not significant differences here between these two categories. But let's take a look at the well-being indicators and environmental awareness indicators. As you can see, there are no significant differences between these two. However, if we only focus on category 3, and we compare it with the rest of the categories, we actually have observed that there is greater potential to enact environmental awareness in green initiatives led by communities. Okay, so how can we actually translate all of these into practice? How can we use all of these in projects, initiatives? I want to ask for your attention for those two specific aspects that we have identified. The first one is ecological integrity. And ecological integrity introduced into the spatial design. And this is a big distinction here, because the spaces that introduce organic environments, meaning that there is fluidity of organic manifestations of nature, for example, more raw nature appearing in the space as opposed to heavily curated natural landscapes, there might be a positive association with better health and well-being. And this might be compatible with the theory of fractal design patterns, which is our innate entanglement to nature patterns, raw nature patterns. Interestingly, we have noticed that projects led by communities have more manifestations of such fluidity in the space. And this has also led us to conclude, let's say from a very first point of view, is that these initiatives may also enact self-transcendent and altruistic values, which is the second aspect that I wanted to mention. A meaningful and purposeful interaction with the natural environment. Understanding self-transcendence as a process of psychologically detaching from the self or expanding beyond the self. So individuals that manifest self-transcendent values might actually, in the long term, hold pro-environmental behaviors. Just to conclude, or just to begin to conclude my presentation, I want just to talk about one case study that we have found here in Singapore, which is quite fascinating, and is the Ground Up initiative. And this initiative has been alive for over 14 years. And they have all actually cultivated such self-transcendent values and altruistic values towards nature. And here we see reflected two main mediators, two main spatial mediators. The first one, the non-human agents, and the second one, the human agents, meaning that the non-human agents and the human agents both have an equal weight. And nature is no longer a passive agent, but plays a key role in creating the space and promoting well-being and altruistic values in the long term. So I want to mention here that time is key. The longer individuals have engaged in these initiatives, the longer these values are ingrained in people or cultivated in people. Over the 13,000 people engaging in these programs, nearly 70% of them actually mentioned to still holding on those values. And nearly 6% of those individuals have participated in pro-environmentalist initiatives. So I would like to conclude simply by saying that, yes, there is possibilities of change, but we need to look at the individual level and how it expands into community actions. And I want just to mention what Arne Naes just once told us. And we know that nature, from the very beginning, is part of ourselves, right? Society and human relationships are important, of course, but ourself is much richer in its constitutive relationships. Therefore, perhaps, if we look at sustainability, we might be also trying to look at that self-transcendence and connection, relevant connection, and purposeful connection to nature. Thank you very much.